abdicating his moral responsibility. He is not afraid of pain. He is not afraid of death. He is not afraid of poverty. He is not afraid of any of the vicissitudes of the human condition. He fears only that he should let himself down and that he should be less than a complete human being.
The philosopher Marcus Aurelius was one of the founding fathers of Stoicism, and he is famous for his book Meditations. The idea of being a great man is kind of nebulous, but there is perhaps no single person in history who has ever been more deserving of that title. This is not a self-help video, I promise you that, but the philosophy that Marcus pioneered and wrote about can be an antidote to so many of the problems that we encounter in modern life. I want to show you why. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor who served from 161 AD to 180 AD. He was the last of the so-called 5 good emperors and served over a period known as the Pax Romana, or the Roman Peace. In fact, when Marcus Aurelius died, the Pax Romana ended. Aurelius, when he was emperor, was the most powerful man in the world. The Romans basically had no concept of the globe outside of their empire, so as far as he was concerned, Marcus was effectively ruler of the world. In this position, he could have anything he wanted. Precedent had been set. The life of a Roman emperor was basically synonymous with hedonism. That was what Roman emperors did. They indulged in money, sex, wine, and any other pursuit that even vaguely occurred to them. It was practically expected. So any vice the mind could have possibly considered was directly within reach for Marcus Aurelius. He was entirely unbound by money, law, custom, or even ethics. No one and nothing would stop him from realizing his wildest desires. But even in those limitless circumstances, Marcus Aurelius chose a life of virtue. He chose to be a good man, and not just in one instant or on one occasion, but every day for all 19 years of his time as emperor. Marcus Aurelius was a fundamentally good man. Being good doesn't make you a great person, but imagine staring down the beast of truly unlimited fantasies and declaring, "No, I choose virtue," not for the sake of praise or fame or admiration, but just for the sake of being good. That is impressive. I mean, consider the circumstances, and consider if you were in those circumstances for almost 20 years. Could you consistently, day in and day out, overcome the monster of temptation, knowing that there would be no ramifications whatsoever, no matter what you choose to do? What would you do? How would you act? I know I couldn't follow the example set by Marcus Aurelius, and we know it was a true example because when no one was looking, that's when Marcus was at his best. Meditations is a book written by Marcus Aurelius. Well, it's not really a book. It was Marcus Aurelius's personal journal. This book is basically Marcus navigating his way through life. It has no real structure aside from being vaguely divided into 12 parts, and it's only about 150 pages. Meditations is the title that publishers have prescribed to it. The writings had no title. They were never intended to be read, much less published, by any person at any point other than Marcus himself. They were Marcus Aurelius's deepest confessions and beliefs. With that in mind, Meditations is immensely revealing as to the character of its writer. Because again, Aurelius wasn't writing this for anyone but himself. But despite this seemingly off-the-cuff nature, Meditations is one of the most powerful and most poignant books ever put to paper. Undoubtedly, the best thing to do is read Meditations for yourself. There are copies of it in almost every single library and bookstore in the country, maybe the world. But for the purposes of this video, there are a few ideas in there that I think are really worth examining. Marcus Aurelius believed in living in accordance with nature. By nature, Aurelius was referring to the plants and animals, yes, but also to the natural order of the universe. Trees grow because that's what they're made to do. They grow as big as they can and become as beautiful as they can, not because they want praise or are looking for some external validation. But instead, they grow to be powerful and awe-inspiring because that's what they're made to do. That is the natural order. A caterpillar becomes a butterfly. A frail, featherless chick becomes an eagle, not because they want to, but because they are created to. In the same way, Marcus believed that the duty of a human was to fulfill their potential. He did not believe in accumulating things or riches, and we'll talk about that later, or being awarded or given accolades. Nature had made you a human, and with that in mind, it was your duty on this earth to be the kindest, most virtuous human that you can possibly be. For Marcus, this is the pinnacle of human achievement, an unfulfilled potential. That was the darkest place you could sink to. After all, you can't control anything else. You can't control what the world throws your way, but you can control how you react. And no matter what happens, a great person weathers the storm and lives up to their fullest, most virtuous potential. That is your duty as a human.
A strange symbol glows, marked on their flesh, and something within you stirs in response.
Marcus Aurelius was an emperor, so although he may have enjoyed sitting around writing all day, that wasn't his job and he didn't write very much. He had to deal with a lot of things and a lot of people. Above all else, Marcus believed that evil, wicked, or just somehow bad people were simply part of our universe. Asking the world to not present you with these people would be like asking a vine to exist without thorns. Don't be ridiculous. There's simply nothing you can do, Marcus says. Bad people exist, and in your life, you will encounter them. Marcus believed in kindness, though, and he believed that people didn't ever want to do the wrong thing. Instead, when people did the wrong thing, it was simply out of ignorance. You can try to teach these people, sure, but it's just not always going to be an option. So we can't control if the universe sends us the immoral or the wicked or the lazy, and if we can't also help these people, which usually we can't, we just have to put up with it. And to do this, Marcus says, you should look inward. He writes to himself, hey, Marcus, you've got faults too. Who are you to judge? Maybe you have different faults than these so-called bad people, but Marcus, you have your faults nevertheless. In a different conversation on a different day, perhaps you, Marcus, would be the ignorant one. And Marcus, it's possible that you just don't understand. He told himself, hey, you can't even be sure that they are doing the wrong thing. The thief who steals to feed his family isn't wrong, you just don't understand. And often in life, you won't understand, and you won't know that you don't understand. So again, don't judge. Ultimately, Marcus Aurelius believed that we were all born for each other. Over and over, he reminded himself, that is the natural order. A tree grows fruit so animals can eat. Animals die so that worms have food. Just like in the natural world, we are all made to help each other. That is, again, our duty. The only true failure in life would be to abdicate this responsibility. So Marcus, you better do it, and you better do it well. We all go through adversity, and Marcus Aurelius was no exception. But just like encountering bad people, Marcus realized that encountering adversity is simply part of the human condition. Again, you can only control what you can control. So don't pray for bad things not to happen. That is a fool's errand, Marcus told himself. Those things are going to happen, and there's positively, absolutely nothing you can do about it. But what you can control, Marcus, is you can control how you react to them. You can control if you are ready to meet adversity when it comes, and it will, Marcus says. You know that it will. When that day arrives, don't be sad because something bad happened. Don't feel bad for yourself. Don't mope. Instead, feel fortunate that you have the tools and the spirit to make it through unscathed. Marcus tells himself, bear these events as a brave man. Go through adversity with bravery and come out on the other side. When you do, realize that this supposedly bad thing was not bad at all. It was simply an opportunity to persist, to rise above, to keep going forward. Marcus Aurelius says when these events come, don't complain. Act. Endure. You can either endure something or you can't. So what happens if and when that unendurable thing comes your way? Don't disgrace yourself, Marcus, he says. All men die, but not all men die complaining. Marcus Aurelius was a man of enormous wealth, but he did not believe this was inherently a problem. Marcus did not vilify material possession like some other philosophers have throughout history, but instead he was cautious with his relationship to the things that he owned. Marcus Aurelius could have had anything he wanted, money, houses, art, wine, but he chose not to. Instead, he said, Marcus, don't dream of physical things that you want. These are meaningless. They don't fulfill your potential. Only you can do that. Reflect on what you do have and value these things. Remember how much you would want them if you didn't have them. But be careful, Marcus, he tells himself, not to value them so much that you would be despondent if they just disappeared. They don't matter. They're nice, but they don't matter. They don't improve you as a person. They don't make you more virtuous or more kind. Your potential is not accumulating things, Marcus. No, the human potential is higher than that. You must live in accordance with nature. Marcus Aurelius spent a lot of his time thinking about death. So much so that it would be impossible to make this video without discussing his opinions on the subject. And his views on death were simple. It's coming whether you like it or not. He tells himself time and time again, it's outside of your control, so don't waste your time fearing death or fretting over mortality. Just like nature has assigned us to be good, to help one another, and to reach our fullest potentials, nature has assigned us to die. Death is a duty. So while you're here, live, be kind, be good, fulfill your role in nature, and then die, because death is also part of that role. Marcus Aurelius, along with a couple other men, was a forebearer of the philosophy known as Stoicism. The Stoics believed in many things. Their school of thought covers logic, ethics, physics, and a whole lot more. But there is one distinction that lies at the core of the Stoic philosophy: the distinction of pleasure versus happiness. Money, fame, even success were external stimuli that provided fleeting moments of pleasure, but this wasn't happiness. Happiness was not so temporary. The concept of happiness was something more. It was a state of being that came entirely from within. It didn't come from being an emperor like Marcus Aurelius. It didn't come from any worldly things. The Stoics said to achieve happiness, you should live a life of virtue. You should continue to better yourself and become all that you possibly can. The only failure, the only true pain, the only true sadness, the only thing worth fearing is to let yourself down by not achieving your potential. Because and only because being great is your duty. Being great is in your very nature.
There's something of value, something your mind craves. Why let its host's memories go to waste? The tadpole has absorbed it all. Its experience could nourish you, strengthen you.
Imagine a beautiful garden in the middle of a busy city. The flowers there are full of bright colors, but the noise from all the cars and buses makes it hard to enjoy their lovely scent and appearance. Now, picture a smart gardener who decides to spend a whole day in silence. He turns off the noisy machines, the hammering, and the talking, and in the middle of all the loudness, a really deep quietness takes over. As he takes care of the plants, this silence becomes his friend. He watches every leaf and every petal, and he listens to the soft sounds of nature. In this quietness, he discovers a very special way of communicating. The plants almost seem to answer him, and he sees things he never noticed before. He's like a patient watcher, and the connection he makes with the garden is even stronger than words can express. quieter you are, the more you will hear. This gardener reminds us that amidst the chaos of life, it's in silence that we find the most subtle answers. He teaches us that true communication doesn't solely reside in words, but in the spaces between them. Just as the garden flourishes when touched by silence, our minds can bloom when we step away from the constant noise. By being quiet, we set aside all words and open ourselves to other voices that were previously drowned out by constant verbal noise. We can effectively listen if we remain in silence, both within and without, tuning into our surroundings and paying attention to what our senses observe. The moral is that silence isn't just the absence of sound, but a language of its own, capable of conveying profound meanings that words cannot capture. In a world of constant distractions, silence invites us to listen more deeply, to create, to find peace, and to reconnect with what truly matters. Through this, we learn and eventually become smarter and wiser. If we refuse to remain silent, we merely share what we already know and learn nothing. Socrates wrote, "Wisdom begins in deep reflection and inner silence." Similarly, Anne Frank, one of the most discussed Jewish victims of the Holocaust, tells us, "In silence, my truest words come to life, and I find the strength to face the world." These voices help us learn about our environment, recognize dangers, and seize opportunities we might have overlooked if we were busy talking. Furthermore, it allows us to gather information about ourselves. Often, we are so occupied with thinking and analyzing that we block the inner voices trying to convey a message to us. Staying silent can also lead to greater philosophical and spiritual understanding. In general, people tend to identify with their thoughts, and therefore believe that we are what we think, that we are aggregates, fabrications of the mind, confusing ourselves with our thoughts. According to Buddha, we are not our thoughts. If we silence ourselves and observe our thoughts, we will discover that all our ideas, concepts, and identifications are fleeting. Thus, according to Buddha, a fixed self in reality doesn't exist. We uncover the illusory nature of thoughts. Only by staying silent do we observe them and recognize them for what they are. Number 2, silence promotes self-discipline and self-mastery. A Holocaust survivor and renowned psychologist, Viktor Frankl, wrote about his experience in Nazi concentration camps. He observed that even in inhumane conditions, prisoners often found strength in inner silence. Silence allowed them to create a space of self-control and self-sufficiency, where they could maintain their mental sanity and find meaning amid chaos. Meditation programs in prisons have shown that prisoners who embraced meditation reported improved self-control, reduced stress, and the ability to respond more constructively to challenging situations, as it requires control over the impulse to speak. The ability to remain silent, especially in emotional or challenging situations, demonstrates emotional maturity and self-control. It also allows for a pause to reflect before responding, avoiding conflicts and carefully choosing words. Mahatma Gandhi, during his nonviolent resistance movements in colonial India, often practiced fasting and silence as forms of protest. He used silence to demonstrate his determination and self-control in the face of oppression, showing that even without words, his actions spoke loudly. The lawyer, rebel leader, and president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, during his years of imprisonment, used silence as a tool to maintain his dignity and resist oppression. He spent decades in prison, enduring isolation and cruel treatment, but his resilient attitude and his ability to remain steadfast amid silence were crucial to his eventual release and leadership in the fight against apartheid. Silence helps develop the ability to manage impulsive reactions, favoring healthier interpersonal relationships and more effective communication. Number 3, silence can send a powerful message. In various scenarios, the act of withholding silence possesses a communicative power that transcends words. By responding with silence and employing timely pauses during conversations, we can effectively express ourselves without the need for speaking or writing. An iconic example of Dutch silent rituals illustrates how silence holds the power to communicate effectively. It allows us to convey what words cannot. The words spoken, the ideas shared, and even the promises made often fall short of fully encapsulating the complexity of the human experience. The uniqueness of silence as a response to tragedy lies in the acknowledgement that no amount of words can fully translate what we seek to express. There is profound meaning in the act of pausing, of staying silent, as a way of celebrating and honoring something or someone. This gesture uniquely conveys respect, surpassing the limitations of words. The strategic use of silence also carries inherent power. American author Mark Twain once stated that while choosing words is important, a well-placed pause can be even more effective. Academic studies demonstrate that during a conversation, silence starts to become uncomfortable after just 2 seconds. Mastering the use of pauses in communication can be a powerful tool for achieving our goals. The uncertainty that silence creates in a conversation often prompts discomfort in people, leading to questions like, "Did I say something wrong?" Or "Does this person not like me?" This discomfort often drives those on the other end to make a decision, attempting to dispel the uncertain void that silence creates in communication. This can be advantageous for the person choosing the right moment to remain silent. Additionally, there is the advantage that, in certain situations, silence is a safer alternative than speaking. There are moments when expressing an opinion might weaken our position, and in such cases, wisdom lies in listening. This stance not only provides us with an opportunity to learn, but also spares us from appearing inadequate by trying to seem knowledgeable about something we actually have limited knowledge of. Opting for silence reveals genuine interest and willingness to listen, something that many people value. Seneca, the Roman writer, once said, "Often I regretted having spoken, never that I remained silent." This insight underscores the importance of discernment in choosing when to speak and when to let silence speak for itself. Number 4. Silence enhances well-being. Silence is a true balm in a deafening world, and in minds constantly in turmoil. Throughout history, numerous stories and experiences have testified to how silence can be the key to calming internal storms. Research findings reinforce that silence not only offers relief to the mind, but also improves sleep and reduces instances of insomnia. A recent study even pointed out that just 2 minutes of silence have a more soothing effect than relaxing music. The intriguing reality is that constant exposure to environmental noise can cause harm. Our stress hormone levels can be triggered by the incessant avalanche of sound that surrounds us, impairing our mental and physical health. Someone once highlighted how we make a grave mistake by underestimating the negative impact of noise. A valuable lesson, given the increasing presence of noisy machines in our modern lives. Amid this chaos, it's remarkable how moments of silence transform into oases of tranquility. They provide us with an escape from the daily barrage of information bombarding us. These moments of stillness possess an almost magical power. Whether in serene meditation, losing oneself in contemplation of an isolated landscape, or simply during a closed-eyed break in a dark room, this space revitalizes us. Silence, despite its simplicity and serenity, possesses astonishing power. And the most incredible part is that we all understand this language, even if we cannot define it in words. It's like a shared secret, mysterious yet filled with clarity, comfort, and density. Best of all, it is accessible to all of us. Thank you for staying until the end of the video. What are your thoughts on the power of silence? Please share your opinion. I, Cicerus, would be thrilled to read your comment. If you are new here, consider subscribing and becoming a part of our community. See you soon.
Physicists have discussed the role of consciousness in quantum mechanics for over a century. The observations made in quantum mechanics totally depend upon the observer's eyes, raising fundamental questions about the nature of reality. But famous British physicist Roger Penrose says that quantum mechanics is inconsistent because the wave function collapses when observed. But many scientists like von Neumann and Wigner think consciousness is necessary to make sense of quantum mechanics. So can our consciousness influence a quantum experiment's outcome? Is our consciousness the only reality? Who is wrong? Quantum mechanics or Roger Penrose? Let's explore what quantum mechanics is and what Roger Penrose has to say.
Current quantum mechanics, strictly speaking, is an inconsistent theory. That's a rather brutal way of saying what Einstein and Schrödinger and even Dirac said, that quantum mechanics is incomplete.
In quantum mechanics, everything is described by a wave function. For example, there's a wave function for a particle going left and one for a particle going right, which might not sound exciting, but it's physics for you. The intriguing part is that there's also a wave function for a particle going both left and right, called a superposition. The standard interpretation of quantum mechanics suggests that such a superposition means the particle is neither left nor right until measured. Upon measurement, the wave function collapses to fit the observed outcome. Albert Einstein strongly disagreed with this idea. He argued that this collapse happens faster than light, deeming it a spooky action at a distance, and therefore incorrect.
Quantum mechanics on the one hand, Einstein's general theory of relativity on the other hand, you see there's a clash. And this clash says something new has to happen. And in that new thing, the state of reduction of the state, spontaneously, no mention of consciousness comes about. Right. Then I say, consciousness itself is a feature of that physics that we need for other reasons.
Right. However, Bohr argued that there was nothing wrong with it, as the wave function isn't a physical reality but merely a description of what we know. Bohr's view was that we can update knowledge faster than light, so there's no violation of the speed of light limit. John Bell used an analogy of the Queen's death and the instant ascension of the Prince of Wales to illustrate that updates in knowledge don't break the speed of light limit. This is how Bohr explained the collapse of the wave function, suggesting it can be updated instantaneously because it describes our knowledge. Despite Einstein's skepticism, Bohr won the debate. If we accept Bohr's view, then the wave function is linked to knowing, and the observer plays a significant role. By this logic, the update of the wave function becomes connected to the entity capable of knowing, which is the human brain. Bohr didn't provide a complete explanation, content with being cryptic, and many physicists have followed his lead. Eugene Wigner, however, had reservations about this view. He believed that the idea of the wave function describing knowledge had a significant problem. To illustrate this, Wigner devised the Wigner's friend experiment. He proposed a scenario where a particle is in a superposition of left and right, and you measure it, but your friend outside the laboratory doesn't know the outcome until you tell her. According to Wigner, for your friend, you are in a superposition of having measured the particle left and right until she collapses your wave function. Based on this, Wigner found it absurd to think that consciousness could be in a superposition. He postulated that consciousness was the cause of the wave function collapse. Today, most physicists believe that a measurement involves an interaction with an apparatus and is independent of whether an observer looks at the result or conveys it to someone else. However, in the early days of quantum mechanics, the meaning of mathematics was unclear. A similar interpretation to Wigner's had previously been proposed by John von Neumann, who was Hungarian despite his German-sounding name, just like Eugene Wigner. Both later emigrated to the United States. Von Neumann argued that a particle in a superposition could cause superpositions of the things it interacts with, leading to superpositions of the entire measurement apparatus and its consequences. For example, if the measurement outcome determines whether a bomb blows up or not, then there would be a superposition of a blown-up bomb and an unexploded one, resulting in a superposition of a world in which you died and one in which you didn't, and so on. Von Neumann concluded that this chain of events needed to be cut somehow. Since everything else in physics seemed to preserve superpositions, he believed the collapse had to be caused by something extra-physical or psychophysical. He attributed it to the conscious perception of an observer. Most physicists today believe that the Wigner von Neumann interpretation poses problems, but all interpretations of quantum mechanics have their challenges. Reinterpreting the mathematics only shifts problems around, much like bumps under the carpet. In the Wigner von Neumann interpretation, the problems manifest as conscious observers with inconsistent knowledge about reality. Taking this seriously would imply that reality depends on who's observing it. The interpretation from Wigner and von Neumann is indeed strange, but it hasn't gained widespread acceptance. The primary reason for physicists' reluctance to embrace it is that it unnecessarily complicates matters. Nobody truly understands what consciousness is, and quantum mechanics can be calculated without considering it, making the introduction of psychophysical factors for wave function collapse seem superfluous. Philosophers dislike this interpretation for a different reason. They find it internally inconsistent. It starts by assuming that consciousness is exempt from the laws of nature because it's extra-physical. However, once consciousness interacts with the physical world and affects our observations, it becomes physical, making it a dualistic problem. You can't have it both ways. Nonetheless, some researchers are still exploring this idea. Recently, David Chalmers and Kelvin McQueen published a paper proposing to address the issues of the Wigner von Neumann interpretation using integrated information theory. As I mentioned earlier, IIT involves assigning a quantity, big psi, to each system based on its connectivity and information processing, which quantifies its level of consciousness. According to IIT, consciousness is not a binary state, but exists on a continuum, with humans being more conscious than carrots, according to Christoph Koch. In their new paper, Chalmers and McQueen use IIT to create a model for wave function collapse induced by systems considered sufficiently conscious based on this quantifiable approach. This goes beyond being an interpretation and becomes a testable modification of quantum mechanics, leading to predictions different from standard quantum mechanics. For example, they suggest that certain states a quantum computer generates might be sufficiently conscious, inducing a collapse, though the specifics depend on the model. Considering it's a paper by philosophers, it's not bad. However, my main reservation about their consciousness-induced collapse model is its unnecessary complexity. If the collapse is induced by a macroscopic thing, why choose the brain? Why not the measurement device? Or even cheese? I propose that it's cheese that collapses the wave function. Prove me wrong. Okay, so here we have people thinking that somehow the amount of consciousness in a system induces collapse, which is kind of weird already. But there are also people who think that deliberately focused attention actually influences how a system collapses. This idea was also brought up by Wigner, though I think it wasn't his intention. In 1967, Wigner published a very influential essay titled Remarks on the Mind-Body Problem, in which he wrote, "We do not know of any phenomenon in which one subject is influenced by another without exerting an influence thereupon." It's not a big step from there to conclude that if conscious knowledge can be influenced by the result of a quantum experiment, then your conscious knowledge can also influence the result of a quantum experiment. Now add to this that back then, scientists were still experimenting with telepathy. Some of them were also studying if concentrating on the outcome of a random number generator would change the outcome. It was just a small step from there to the idea that if you focus your attention on photons going through a double slit, that affects the pattern on the screen. I'm not making this up. This is literally how those experiments work. There have been a few of them since the 1990s. The most recent one was published in 2012. The idea is that when a conscious being concentrates on the light passing through a double slit, then that has a similar effect as if you had measured which slit the light went through, so the interference pattern should change. The authors described their experiment as follows. It was explained to the participants that they could try to mentally see or imagine which of the two slits the photons were passing through, to become one with the optical system in a contemplative way, to mentally block one of the two slits, or to mentally bend the laser beam so as to cause it to pass through one slit rather than both. They then statistically analyzed the difference in the interference pattern between the cases where the participants were told to concentrate on the double slit and not. The authors claimed to see a statistically significant difference. Their analysis method was later criticized by another group, which argued that the method of analysis is unreliable and the results can't be trusted. Similar criticisms have been raised about earlier experiments. How difficult can it be, you may ask, to figure out whether the pattern of a double slit changed? Well, the issue is that the common illustration with multiple stripes for the unobserved double slit and two thick bands for the observed one is so misleading one can only call it wrong. It's because a single slit also makes an interference pattern, it just looks slightly different from that of a double slit. So if you don't expect your conscious observers to affect really each photon, it can actually be difficult to tell the difference. There'd be easier examples to look at, but maybe they didn't want that. In any case, the brief summary is that the results of experiments that claimed to find an influence of conscious thought on the outcome of quantum experiments have remained highly controversial and have not been reproduced. In addition, the idea that your conscious attention somehow influences what a wave function collapses into doesn't make sense. Wigner was right in saying that in physics, if one thing can affect another, then that influence can go both ways. But that doesn't mean that the influence is equally relevant in both directions. If it rains, you'll get wet. If you swear at the sky in response, then the pressure waves coming out of your mouth move some air molecules. So they indeed influence the rain. But for all practical purposes, it doesn't make any difference. And your brain indeed has a physical influence on its environment. That's because thinking generates electric and magnetic fields, but they're too weak to collapse the light going through a double slit. I believe this is where the idea of quantum healing comes from, that by focusing your attention, you can somehow influence what processes happen in your own body. My major problem with this isn't even that it's pseudoscience, but that it blames patients for being ill. Hey, if you're dying from cancer, that's your own fault. Should have learned more quantum mechanics when you still could. Now let me add a brief comment about Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff, who are maybe most famous for claiming that
debated the role of consciousness in quantum mechanics for more than 100 years. Some podcast episodes will soon reach that length, but I have a dentist appointment in 2 hours, so we'll have to wrap it up a little more quickly. Why did some physicists like von Neumann and Wigner think that consciousness is necessary to make sense of quantum mechanics, and can consciousness influence the outcome of a quantum experiment? That's what we'll talk about today. In quantum mechanics, everything is described by a wave function. There's, for example, a wave function for a particle going left and one for a particle going right, which sounds about as exciting as you expect physics to be. But the weird bit is that there's also a wave function for a particle that goes both left and right. This is called a superposition. According to the standard interpretation of quantum mechanics, such a superposition means that the particle is indeed neither left nor right, but both, until you make a measurement. The moment you measure the particle, you know whether it went left or right, and the wave function collapses to one that fits your observation. Albert Einstein didn't like this at all. Yes, that guy again. Einstein said, "This collapse happens faster than light. That's a spooky action at a distance, so it has to be wrong." But Bohr said, there's nothing wrong with that, because the wave function isn't real. It just describes what we know, and you can update knowledge faster than the speed of light. John Bell used the following example. When the Queen dies in London, the Prince of Wales becomes instantaneously king, no matter where he is. So why wasn't the speed of light limit broken when the Queen died? Because we can update our knowledge about what happened elsewhere without causing any event elsewhere. And this is how Bohr thought about the collapse of the wave function. You can update it instantaneously because it just describes what we know. Einstein wasn't convinced, but Bohr won the argument. So if you believe Bohr, then the wave function has something to do with knowing. But who or what knows? Well, the observer does. By this logic, the update of the wave function becomes linked to the thing that can know something, which is the human brain. Bohr didn't actually explain what this all means. He was quite content with being incomprehensible, and a lot of physicists have since followed his example. But Eugene Wigner was bothered. He thought the idea that the wave function describes knowledge has a big problem. To illustrate this, he came up with what is now called the Wigner's friend experiment. He said, suppose you have created a particle in a superposition of left and right, and you measure it. But you're inside a laboratory and have a friend waiting outside in front of the closed door, because that's how physicists treat their friends. Your friend doesn't know the outcome of the measurement until you open the door and tell her what you measured. Wigner said that for her, you are in a superposition of having measured the particle left and right until she collapses your wave function. He then argued that it would be absurd if consciousness was in a superposition. And since no one knew just what caused the wave function to collapse, he postulated that it was consciousness. Most physicists think today that a measurement is an interaction with some apparatus. It has nothing to do with whether you or someone else looks at the result or whether you tell someone about it. But in the early days of quantum mechanics, it was unclear what the mathematics means. A similar interpretation of quantum mechanics as Wigner's had been put forward earlier by John von Neumann. Despite the German-sounding name, von Neumann was Hungarian, like Eugene Wigner. Both later emigrated to the United States. Von Neumann's argument was that a particle in a superposition can cause superpositions of the things it interacts with. This leads to superpositions of the entire measurement apparatus and everything that follows from that. Say you use the measurement outcome to decide whether to blow up a bomb or not. Then you get a superposition of a bomb that's blown up and one that didn't. And that leads to a superposition of a world in which you died and one in which you didn't, and a superposition of worlds in which you go on to win the Nobel Prize and one in which you didn't, and so on. Von Neumann said that this chain of events needs to be cut somehow, and since everything in physics seemed to keep the superpositions alive, he thought the collapse had to be caused by something extra-physical or psychophysical. It had to be the conscious perception of an observer. The observer either sees a bomb explode or not. That's the end of that chain of superpositions, and maybe also the end of the observer. This idea of Wigner and von Neumann that consciousness causes the collapse of the wave function is an interpretation of quantum mechanics rather than a new theory, because mathematically it doesn't make any difference. That's because the only observations we can make any statements about are those which were eventually registered in our brain. Though you might argue that really there's only one brain, which is your own, and everything else is your imagination, in which case, thanks for imagining me. The Wigner and von Neumann interpretation has problems because all interpretations of quantum mechanics have problems. Reinterpreting maths just pushes problems around like bumps under the carpet. In the Wigner-von Neumann interpretation, the problems manifest themselves as conscious observers who have inconsistent knowledge about reality. If you take this seriously, it'd imply that reality itself depends on who's observing what. I talked about this in an earlier video, but today I want to focus on the consciousness issue. The interpretation from Wigner and von Neumann is weird, but not wrong. Still, it never became widely accepted. I believe the major reason it's never been popular with physicists is that it's unnecessarily complicated. No one knows what consciousness is anyway, and if you want to calculate the outcome of a measurement in quantum mechanics, you don't need to know. So introducing some psychophysical factors to induce the collapse of the wave function is just unnecessary word salad. Philosophers dislike this interpretation for a different reason, namely because it's internally inconsistent. You start with assuming that consciousness is not subject to the same laws of nature as everything else because it's extra-physical, but then consciousness interacts with the physical world, and that means it's itself physical because you can test its effect on our observations. It's the same problem as dualism. If the mind is non-physical, then it doesn't help you explain observations in the physical world. You can't have your cake and eat it too. But there are still people working on it. For example, just a few months ago, David Chalmers and Kevin McQueen wrote a paper about this. They proposed to address the issues of the Wigner-von-Neumann interpretation by using a particular mathematical model for consciousness, that is, integrated information theory, IIT for short. We briefly talked about IIT in an earlier video. The basic idea is that each system is assigned a quantity, big psi, that you can calculate from how well connected the system is and how it processes information. The bigger psi, the more conscious the system. In this theory, consciousness is not binary, it's not on or off, it's gradual. This is why Christoph Koch, one of the proponents of integrated information theory, thinks it's a panpsychist theory. Everything is a little bit conscious, it's just that humans are a little bit more conscious than carrots. Though I want to apologize to all carrots who are watching. In their new paper, Chalmers and McQueen use IIT to build a model for wave function collapse that is induced by systems which are sufficiently conscious in this quantifiable sense. This is no longer an interpretation of quantum mechanics but a modification, and it leads to predictions that differ from those of quantum mechanics. For example, they propose that some states that a quantum computer could generate might be sufficiently conscious and thus induce a collapse, though the details depend on the model. For a paper by two philosophers, it isn't bad. My major misgiving about their consciousness-induced collapse model is that it's unnecessarily complicated. If you're building a model in which collapse is induced by a macroscopic thing, why use a brain? Why not use the measurement device or cheese? I would like to propose that it's really cheese that collapses the wave function. Prove me wrong. Okay, so here we have people thinking that it's somehow the amount of consciousness in a system that induces collapse, which is kind of weird already. But there are also people who think that deliberately focused attention actually influences how a system collapses. This idea was also brought up by Wigner, though I think it wasn't his intention. In 1967, Wigner published a very influential essay titled Remarks on the Mind-Body Problem, in which he wrote, "We do not know of any phenomenon in which one subject is influenced by another without exerting an influence thereupon. It's not a big step from there to conclude that if conscious knowledge can be influenced by the result of a quantum experiment, then your conscious knowledge can also influence the result of a quantum experiment." Now, add to this that back then scientists were still experimenting with telepathy. Some of them were also studying if concentrating on the outcome of a random number generator would change the outcome. It was just a small step from there to the idea that if you focus your attention on photons going through a double slit, that affects the pattern on the screen. I'm not making this up. This is literally how those experiments work. There have been a few of them since the 1990s. The most recent one was published in 2020. The idea is that when a conscious being concentrates on the light passing through a double slit, then that has a similar effect as if you had measured which slit the light went through, so the interference pattern should change. The authors described the experiment as follows. It was explained to the participants that they could try to mentally see or image which of the two slits the photons were passing through, to become one with the optical system in a contemplative way, to mentally block one of the two slits, or to mentally bend the laser beam so as to cause it to pass through one slit rather than both. They then statistically analyzed the difference in the interference pattern between the cases where the participants were told to concentrate on the double slit and not. The authors claimed to see a statistically significant difference. Their analysis method was later criticized by another group, which argued that the method of analysis is unreliable and the results can't be trusted. Similar criticisms have been raised about earlier experiments. How difficult can it be, you may ask, to figure out whether the pattern of a double slit changed? Well, the issue is that the common illustration with multiple stripes for the unobserved double slit and two thick bands for the observed one is so misleading I can only call it wrong. It's because a single slit also makes an interference pattern. It just looks slightly different from that of a double slit. So if you don't expect your conscious observations to affect really each photon, it can actually be difficult to tell the difference. That'd be easier examples to look at, but maybe they didn't want that. In any case, the brief summary is that the results of experiments that claimed to find an influence of conscious thought on the outcome of quantum experiments have remained highly controversial and have not been reproduced. In addition, the idea that your conscious attention somehow influences what the wave function collapses into doesn't make sense. Wigner was right in saying that in physics, if one thing can affect another, then that influence can go both ways. But that doesn't mean that the influence is equally relevant in both directions. If it rains, you'll get wet. If you swear at the sky in response, then the pressure waves coming out of your mouth move some air molecules, so they indeed influence the rain. But for practical purposes, it doesn't make any difference. And your brain indeed has a physical influence on its environment. That's because thinking generates electric and magnetic fields, but they're too weak to collapse the light going through a double slit. I believe this is where the idea of quantum healing comes from, that by focusing your attention you can somehow influence what processes happen in your own body. My major problem with this isn't even that it's pseudoscience, but that it blames patients for being ill. Hey, if you're dying from cancer, that's your own fault. You should have learned more quantum mechanics when you still could. Finally, let me add a brief comment about Roger Penrose. Are you extroverted, a social butterfly, or more the introverted type who lingers around in the corner of the room? Are you agreeable or quick to argue? Do you like your routine, or do you get easily bored? What's your personality? The internet is full of personality tests. Self-help gurus use them for dating advice. Employers use them to decide whom to hire. Schools use them to recommend to students what to study. And travel companies use them to suggest travel locations. I recommend, if you have a personality, you should subscribe to this channel. Are personality tests scientific, or are they just a modern version of horoscopes? Did you know that Google reportedly only looks for one personality trait, and now wonder which one it is? That's what we'll talk about today. The Oxford Dictionary of Psychology defines personality as the total of behavioral and mental characteristics that are distinctive of an individual. It's the pattern of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors that make every person different. Let's take this definition apart. The first relevant part of the definition is that it's a pattern. Other behaviors may be distinctive, but they change from day to hour. They might depend on what you ate, or how much you slept, or what you read in the news in the morning. We call that mood, not personality. The relation between mood and personality is like that between weather and climate. Personality is the long-term average over a few couple of years. Some people and places are a little bit more rainy than others, or a little bit more sunny, or a little bit more stormy. The second important part is that it's a distinctive pattern. I tend to get tired at night and sleep regularly. That's arguably a behavioral characteristic, and it's also a pattern, but it's one common to all humans, so it's got nothing to do with my personality. It's not distinctive. How long does a distinctive pattern have to last to count as a part of your personality? Loosely speaking, if it's less than a few weeks, it doesn't count. A few months or years, and you can call that a part of your personality. If that sounds a bit vague, it's because it is. This is psychology after all, not physics. Psychologists, however, like to up their science game by measuring things. That's why they've come up with several ways of quantifying personality types. If such a test actually measures an aspect of your personality, then it should be compatible with the definition we just looked at. This means First of all, that it should be something that's specific to you and not a general characteristic of human behavior. You also want to make sure that the test tells you something about what the person does, not just about what they say. So you need an independent way to assess the answers. You can do this by asking other people or by asking the person for verifiable details from their life. It's called the validity of the test. Third, the test should identify a pattern, so the result should remain reasonably stable when you retake the test after a few days or weeks. That's the reliability of the test. And fourth, you want to look for traits that are aspects of human psychology, not of social or cultural context. This property of a test is called universality, though calling it universality is maybe somewhat of an exaggeration, not like we're going to ask people in Andromeda whether they like partying. That a test is universal doesn't mean that the traits shouldn't depend on cultural context. They usually do, but that the reliability of the test doesn't depend on it. Basically, the traits should exist wherever you go. In a nutshell, Marmite is not a personality type. The two most widely used psychology tests are the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator and the Big Five Inventory. You can take simple versions of both of these tests for free online, though they usually try to get you to pay for a detailed assessment. Maybe watch this video to the end before you spend money on those tests. We'll first look at what science has to say about Myers-Briggs and the Big Five, and then we'll look at what we can learn from this. The Myers-Briggs test assesses you on 4 different scales, each of which has a letter. That's the scale from extroversion to introversion, sensing to intuition, thinking to feeling, and judging to perceiving. The result gives you a 4-letter label. Altogether, there are 2 to the 4, so 16 personality types, and that's all the maths there'll be in this video. This test was created in 1943 by 2 American writers, Isabel Briggs Myers and her mother, Catherine. The father was a physicist, which might have been why they felt a need to understand human personality types, but the overarching goal of their test was to help find employment for women while men were fighting in World War II. Here's me taking a free online test of the Myers-Briggs type. I come out being in J. That's introverted, intuition, thinking, judging. And this particular brand of test also thinks I'm a little turbulent, whatever that means. I think my mum would agree. In any case, according to the result page, I'm rational and quick-witted with an uncanny knack for seeing right through phoniness and hypocrisy, and that I may struggle to find people who can keep up with my non-stop analysis of everything around me. That's quite accurate, and I'm very flattered, which isn't so surprising because this is the most flattering way to rephrase the answers I just gave to all those questions. A less flattering version is that I'd be the kind of person who makes jokes at a funeral if I wasn't too introverted to talk to anyone in the first place. I've taken this test a few times over the past 20 years and my result hasn't changed, but turns out that for many people this isn't the case. An old version of the test was found to reproduce the classification for 47% of people at retesting after 5 weeks. This might sound worse than it is, since there are 16 categories. If the results were basically random, the chance to reproduce the result would be 1/16, so about